Okay, thank you very much for joining us. This is another Hangout. This is going to be the fourth Hangout of the IIP MOOC on Learning Assessment. Today we have a great pleasure to connect between very cold Paris, -2 degrees in centigrade, and almost 40 degrees in Melbourne, Australia. We will be interviewing Professor Patrick Griffin today. It's going to be about the assessment and teaching of 21st century skills. So let me just first introduce Professor Patrick Griffin. He is the Emeritus Professor who has held the chair of education assessment at the University of Melbourne. And for 26 years, he has been the director of the Assessment Research Center. And then from 2009, he has been the executive director of the Assessment and Teaching of 21st Century Skills project that he's going to talk about today. He's a fellow of the International Academy of Education and has conducted assessment and evaluation research project in more than 20 countries. Now, I also have to add that he is the lead author of this book, Assessment and Teaching of 21st Century Skills. All right, with Barry McGaugh and Ether Care as the editors. Now, I will start with the first question. Now, these questions were based on the inputs that came from the participants, our dear participants, who are really keen on knowing more about the 21st century skills. So our first question, which is very general, can you briefly describe what the 21st century skills are, and then why we're concerned about them, why it's so important, why everybody's talking about 21st century skills? Go ahead, Patrick.
Okay. Actually, I'm not sure that I can answer that very briefly, but I'll try. If we if we think about the way in which the world economy has changed in the last maybe 100 years, we've gone from an agricultural type society through an industrial society to an information age. And in an agricultural society, people are generally rewarded in their employment or in their lives about how many things they can do. In an industrial era, people were rewarded in terms of how much they knew. But in an information age, we're beginning to identify that people are rewarded in their workplace by how well they can think. So the shift from doing to knowing to thinking is a part of the transition that's taking place in the developed world in particular. And you can think about education systems having a very important role, because they've got to take the students out of the farm and into the factory as they move from agriculture to industry, and out of the factory into the office as they move from industrial to information age, and then from the office onto the internet as an employment medium. In order to do that, the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic need to be supplemented with what we call the 4 C's. And the 4 C's are creativity, communication, critical thinking, and collaboration. And those last 4 things are what are called the 21st century skills. We could add curiosity to that and make it 5 C's. They're important because people don't any longer have a guarantee of being able to use their labor or what they know in the workplace. They have to be able to think. They have to be able to work in teams. They have to be curious. They have to be able to critically think things through, and they have to be able to communicate with one another. So they're the skills, and pressure on schools and universities are very, very important to shift their curriculum. So I guess that's a brief description, but if they really want a longer one, they have to read that whole book.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Patrick. You're, yeah, of course, publicizing the book, which is very good. Now, you just mentioned something about the curiosity. This, reminds me of that Einstein used to say that having the curiosity is actually the one of the most important virtues in our learning world. Okay, so that you mentioned the 4 C's, which is very interesting. But then now we will come into the question about the test framework. The learning domains and test frameworks. You mentioned 4 C's. We also know something about the XAB model, which is a kind of a knowing, or the going into more of a skills and what attitude, etc., values, etc. So our question, next question is, what does it look like? There are usually no curriculum subject in this something called the 21st century skills. So can you elaborate what these skills are? What kind of assessment? What does an assessment look like? We also have another question about the test framework, but can you first answer to this question? Please go ahead.
Okay, it's true that there's no particular curriculum to do with 21st century skills, but the way in which subjects and disciplines are being taught needs to change a little to accommodate these new skills. So instead of drill and practice so that the kids can remember lots of things and then retell it, which is how much they know, they need to be able to be critical thinkers, so that if they're reading on the internet, for example, they shouldn't just accept that that's fact or correct. We need now, when we're teaching reading, a very simple skill, a very fundamental skill, one of the 3 R's, we need to be sure that they can read something on the internet and then they check it, challenge it, and look for another source of information which will either verify, validate, or repudiate that. So they don't just accept what they read, they become critical thinkers. They're curious to try and find things out and explore. So a lot of countries are starting to put this into practice. In the United States, for example, there is the core curriculum, and there is also what's called Partnerships 21, which is about the 21st century and the kind of transdisciplinary skills. In Europe, you've got the European Schools Network, which is looking at what they call transdisciplinary skills or across the curriculum. In Australia, we have the general capabilities attached to the Australian curriculum. In Singapore, there is another curriculum that's being worked out and developed where these 4 C's are being gradually introduced into the curriculum. But it's very difficult because the schools don't have curiosity teachers, they don't have critical thinking teachers. We hope they have teachers who critically think, but where we need to be able to show the teachers how these 4 C skills fit within their particular discipline. So in mathematics, we need them to be problem solvers. We need them to be curious and communicative with one another. We need people to work together, to collaborate, to work as a team to solve problems. We need them to explore different ways of communication. We need to challenge each other rather than just accept statements that are being made. We don't challenge the person, though. Of course, we challenge the subject matter. So it's a different way of teaching and a different style of teaching.
Okay, great. Now, about this teacher thing and the teaching, we're going to catch up in the later questions. There's another question that relates to the test frameworks. What are some of the new metrics, new metrics being used in order to assess these new skills? Can you also elaborate on the process of developing such metrics? For example, are there any, like different taxonomy levels going from the easier level all the way to most difficult levels?
Yes, the answer to all of that is yes. There's all of those things are beginning to develop. The new metric is a very interesting way to think about it. I mean, how do you measure collaborative skills? How do you measure the way in which an individual person contributes to a joint solution? One of the things that distinguishes, say, group work in the classroom from collaborative work is that if we have a group work in the classroom, the group of people all address the same problem. And what often happens in the classroom is that one individual is a leading person and they do all of the work and the rest of the group gets the credit. With collaborative work, that's not possible because every person in the group developing a collaborative task needs to make a contribution, and no one person should be able to solve whatever the task is on their own. Example, if we have a jigsaw puzzle and we have 3 or 4 people and we put all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle on the table and we say to the group, put the puzzle together, some dominant people will do all of the work and everybody else will sit back and let it happen. And they all get an A because they succeeded. But if we take the jigsaw puzzle and we give some to each person in the group, nobody can put the puzzle together on their own. Everybody must contribute their pieces of the puzzle in order to solve it. So when we're looking at collaboration, we need to have a task or a problem. We need to know what are the resources needed to solve that problem. And then we assign some resources to each person in the group separately. Nobody can solve it. So the metric then is how much do they contribute? And one of the ways that we've developed in our project to measure this, if you can imagine groups of 3 or 4 students all doing this jigsaw puzzle in the classroom and arguing about how to put pieces together, it would be pandemonium in the classroom. And how would a teacher wandering around observe this and assess every student, even if they had a checklist or a set of rubrics to do the assessment? Do the head-in, they wouldn't be able to do it. So what we've done is put it all on technology, on the computer, and we let the computer track every move the student makes, every click, every step, every drag, every pause, and we timestamp everything. Then we analyze that activity log file and we look at the kinds of patterns of behavior that indicate social skills, the kinds of behaviors that indicate cognitive skills, and we then get a measure of the extent to which they are engaged in the task, the way in which they participate, their capacity to see the task from another person's point of view or perspective taking. We also look at the extent to which they assign roles and how their unique control of resources determines the way in which they work together with other people. They're the social skills. That involves negotiation, it involves metacognition, it involves responding to other people, it involves knowing the other people's strengths and weaknesses and adjusting your own performance. It involves knowing your own strengths and weaknesses and adjusting your performance. And then the cognitive skills, how well can they analyze the task? Can they understand what all the elements are, what all the resources are? Can they understand what they control, what somebody else controls? And can they build a strategy based on that? So building a strategy, negotiation, looking at insights, trying things out, becoming systematic rather than just trial and error. Then there's the group themselves. How well do they build knowledge and solve problems associated with this? So we can go from just identifying patterns of events and if-then sorts of things right through to testing hypotheses. Very complicated, sounds complicated, but all that happens is that kids play games on the computer tracks everything they do and then analyzes that and gives us not a score, but we're able to trap and explore what is a low-level performance, the next level, and the way in which it's designed now is that the teacher is told in problem solving, in social skills, what's the level the student's at and how to improve the student's performance to the next level. And that's the taxonomy question that we might look at. And there's a whole new metric. It's not an inch, it's not a centimetre, and it's not a logit. It's a level, and it's a level of skill that they have. And the skill level is the new metric.
Great. Okay. So using the technology, it's possible to measure certain things that could be more objective. You know, you can generate more objective measures, which probably may not be so evident if we don't have the technology. Now, we're going into another set of questions. Now, a lot of participants asked something about universality, applicability in their countries, how comparable these measures are between countries that have different socioeconomic level, etc. But that question comes just a little bit later. But before that, let us ask this question, which is that in PISA 2015, there are some collaborative problem-solving measures that were assessed, the learning about the collaborative problem-solving. Why is this domain chosen as the 21st century skills and not other domains, right?
Well, that's a good question. In 2009, at the end of the American Education Research Association conference in San Diego, about 250 researchers met for 3 days to, first of all, define what was meant by 21st century skills. And they talked about the changes due to technology in the workplace, changing the way people work, the tools they work with, the way they think and the way they live. And these set of skills was known as the K-SAVE model, K-S-A-V-E, knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, and ethics. And they defined, you'll see in chapter 2 in that book that you waved around, these 10 skills that were defined. Among them were critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and problem solving. Early in 2010, we met as a small group in London at the World Education Forum, and we had a meeting and we decided if we combined collaboration with problem solving, with critical thinking and communication, we'd have something that was quite new, and we called it collaborative problem solving. We literally invented the term in 2010 in that conference in London. And then representatives of Microsoft, Cisco and Intel that were supporting the assessment and teaching of 21st century skills project began to lobby the OECD to include collaborative problem solving in the PISA project. And as we now know, by 2015, it was assessed in 65 countries. We don't know yet what the results were. We'll get our first taste of that in May of this year. Now, when we developed collaborative problem solving tasks, we said people had to interact with other people in order to collaborate. And we also were in a project called the Assessment and Teaching of 21st Century Skills. So we had to give the teacher information they could use. Excuse me. PISA is a summative survey who informs government policy. So PISA has to get a probability sample of individual students, not pairs of students, not groups of students. And they have to get information that advises governments, not teachers. So there's a difference in the two. So PISA designed collaborative tasks where the students interacted with a computer. And they then looked at human to agent interaction, not human to human interaction. And we're still looking to see how well those two approaches, if they measure the same thing. There's a little bit of a controversy about it, but let's wait until May and we'll see how it all turns out with the PISA project. That's why collaborative problem solving was assessed.
Okay, great. Now, you're now talking about the PISA students, which is it could be a different kind of target population. We have received actually from the participants many questions about the applicability, right? So those learning domains applicable not only to the PISA target population, but then other, for example, educational levels, primary, pre-primary levels, for example. What about the students from different socioeconomic background? How about countries in conflict or developing countries in general? Or how about the pupils out of school? There are other contexts that other students who are in the inclusive context. So our participants are really concerned about whether 21st century skills could be really applicable in their situation where they're working. So please go ahead.
Well, as I said before, we need to think about the development of economies in countries, agrarian countries, agricultural-based countries, where we see a lot of this in Africa, for example, where you've got almost subsistence living through to commercial farming or mining, primary industry, where basically the industry is producing a commodity, and that commodity is sold to other countries or to other people, and that's how they earn their income. And the people working in the mines, in the farms, are rewarded on the basis of what they can do. So collaborative work, group work, teamwork, is less important in those. Everybody has a role which they have to play in order to make it productive. In an industrial economy, it's about how much you know that enables you to succeed in a workplace. So yes, as we move from into an underdeveloped country to a developing country to a developed country, then collaborative problem solving and that kind of the 21st century skills become much more important. And that's why the OECD has it, because as you know, the OECD is about developed countries. It's not about the kind of your brief at UNESCO where you often deal with underdeveloped countries. But if you want an underdeveloped country or a developing country to move in that direction, you need to have an education system that would prepare the population for that kind of shift. What's happening in many developed countries is that the manufacturing industry is disappearing. Certainly the primary industry, mining and agriculture, is becoming increasingly digitized. Robots are doing the work. In Australia, we have iron ore mining in the northwest of the continent, and huge trucks, half as big as a house, are filled with iron ore as they ship it off to other countries to be processed. But those trucks are driven by computers in buildings 5,000 kilometres south of the mine. There are no drivers in the trucks. All of these things, and we now know that Google has driverless cars and all of that sort of thing. Once you take the labour out of an industry, it never goes back. The robots take it over, digitisation takes it over. That's happening in the agrarian society. It's happening in the industrial society, where industry and manufacturing goes offshore into cheap labour countries. So developed countries have almost no employment for people in the primary industry, almost no employment for people in the secondary industry, and they only have emerging employment for people in the service industries. If we stay with developing countries always looking at mining and agriculture, they will be run over by robotics and there will be no employment. If they stay in a manufacturing or industrial economy where jobs are dependent upon repetitive labour acts, anything that's routine and repetitive can soon be digitized and they will also lose their jobs. So the best thing that can be done for developing countries is to move their education along very swiftly so that the capacity of people to think, to communicate, to collaborate, to create and to inquire is far more better as a education system for life and work, and it will help the economies of those countries. There are countries in the Middle East, for example, where almost 60% of university graduates are unemployed and unemployable, because in that part of the world, literally they pump up the oil and sell it, and once that starts to be robotized or digitized, there's no employment for people who come out of universities with those kind of industrial era skills. So while people would say, what on earth would 21st century skills be for a developing country? A very urgent problem for those developing countries, because if they don't have it, the economic divide in the world will get so wide that we've got a time bomb ticking away in terms of the balance of life and opportunities for people around the world. And education is the sole means of changing that imbalance between countries. So there's a real problem emerging as we move into an information age where the technology divide will cause serious divisions between people, between economies, between governments, and we may have a serious problem in the near future.
Okay, So what we understood from what you said is that we have to have the education sector, the education program that are ready for this kind of program. So we now go into another set of questions, actually a big question about the link between what you are assessing and what we have to think about in terms of teaching. All right. Many participants have asked that question, how can we ensure the strong linkage, between the assessment and teaching of these skills? And these skills may not be in the curriculum. How can these skills be integrated in teaching? How can the teacher use the assessment result to make an impact in the classroom teaching? That is another direction, right? And then what are some of the particular teaching skills? So it's not about the learning domain that exists, but then the teachers will have to know how to do the teaching. And that means that teacher training is probably going to be an important area. So how these learning domains, if these learning domains are not yet in the priority for the country, priority for the education sector, then how can teachers' voices be heard by the decision makers? Okay, there are many questions. That is a very important area. So go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge question. We could talk about that for a week, but obviously we don't have a week. Look, I want to go back to the kind of agriculture, manufacturing and information and the digital world and the emergence of that in terms of teaching now. In an agricultural society, people who work on the land really work for another person who owns the land, and people who own the land really have all the power. In an industrial society, the people who control the source of capital, in a sense, and run the factories and employ people, really dominate the power structures within society. But the people who work in the factories, what they have is their labour. And so during an industrial era, we had the kind of capital-social dichotomy in ideology, and we had that capitalism and socialism divide around the world, and that's by and large disappeared. Even thoroughly socialist countries are becoming more market-driven in their economies. As we move into an information age, the people who really control what we know and what we think are people who control the media, because the media, in fact, is our source of information. Apart from the internet and blogs and that sort of Wikipedia and WikiLeaks and that sort of thing. So there is another shift in politics taking place rapidly. And the opposition, the real control, people have control over how people think and how well they think, are teachers. So instead of the socialist capitalist or socialist capitalist dichotomy, we have information and education. And now teachers have a really important role. They need to know how to learn. They need to know how students learn, and they need to be able to develop the skills of learning amongst the teachers, amongst the students. So again, we need teachers who know how learning takes place, students who know how to learn and explicitly know how to learn. So they know about task analysis, they know about self-monitoring, they know about self-regulation, they know about communication skills, and we know that our teachers need to know that as well. We actually need a new type of teacher, one who looks at a student with a class with a great spread of skills and is ready and able to teach all of the kids in the classroom, not to the middle, not to the top, not to the bottom, but able and ready every day to teach a whole group of kids as a facilitator in the classroom rather than the source of expertise, because Mr. Google has really taken over as the expert, and anybody wants to know something can just Google it or some other search engine and get the information. The teacher's role now is to make sure that they understand how important, how accurate, and how worthwhile that piece of information is. It's a totally new job.
All right, thank you. Uh, I was actually really thrilled to hear about something that you mentioned, that learning to learn. Actually, that's one of the things that UNESCO promotes very much, and also the inclusiveness, that the teachers are supposed to be able to teach to all of them, not just the middle or the ones that are at the top level. So, the new agenda for 2030, which is actually putting new emphasis on the learning for all, is a very interesting link with what you have mentioned. Now, we're going to have another question, which is actually the final question, that are based on the question that I have compiled based on the questions that came from the participants now, which is about the future perspective. What is the future of assessment in these skills? Now, we may think that we are already thinking about kind of futuristic kind of learning domains, but then 21st century, we are already in the 21st century, so what we talked about is not really the future. So what is the future of assessment in these schools, and how might this lead to new ways of assessment in general?
Good question. Probably technology will take a very central role in assessment in now and in the future. But doesn't have to be on a desktop computer, because we've got pretty powerful computers that are now part of our telephones. So we would be looking to build apps that can extend the way in which we monitor students' learning. I think in the future, we could have a situation where what we've done in our project of capturing every move they make, every pause, every comment that they make to one another, and building an analysis of that in learning analytics and data analytics, and mapping that onto a developmental progression of increasing sophistication in a whole range of skills. Could be mathematics, it could be science, but ongoing work through interaction between people, what people do on the internet. All of that data in the background becomes available, the big data as they call it. But if we can analyze that and begin to interpret it in terms of increasing sophistication of skills, and get away from scores, numbers, so that we don't give the teacher a score about a student, we give the teacher a description of what the student appears to be ready to learn. So the teacher then knows to teach that particular skill. So it's about emphasizing the student's skills, not their scores. It's about emphasizing the development of the student and scaffolding their learning, not the things they can't do and fixing it. So it's about development, not deficit. It's about using observable and objective evidence rather than inference. So we need to know what they can do, say, make and write, and emphasize those things rather than think about what do they know, what do they understand, what do they think, what do they feel, because they're not manifest. We can't do much with that. So it's about direct evidence, about development, about skills, not scores. And more, it's going to be about teamwork and collaboration between teachers taking joint responsibility for the students. Quite a few changes. So the assessment, I think, will become very much routinized. Our phones will probably be the source of data. They'll capture everything we do. We'll have little apps that will sort out what we know, and we'll probably even have artificial intelligence built into that will become a tutor for the student. So on your telephone, you'll have your assessment of subjects, critical skills. You'll have little artificial intelligence built into it so that they give you probes and comments and hints, tell you where to read, what to look up on the internet. Where's the teacher in this? Certainly not the expert at the front, but your smartphone. Not even a smartphone, because in many of the developing countries, the analog network still exists. The digital network is being soaked up by the smartphones, but the analog network may well become the avenue for developing countries to access the internet in a very cheap way. It's a resource that's missing. So we know that Nokia, we know that Microsoft are already looking at analog services and analog networks to build the smartphones. Now the educators and the computer programmers and the resource and digital companies need to get together and build the apps for these phones that can monitor what kids think, how well they think, give them hints and clues by building in artificial intelligence. It's a bit scary, but it might be the equivalent of the no driver car. We got a classroom with no teacher. It's all done on an app.
My goodness. Now, it's okay, yeah. All right, now, thank you very much, Pat. We have some questions now. Well, one of the questions that just came is that how can you assess these skills that you mentioned with the old-fashioned low-tech way? You mentioned that Microsoft is coming in to try to solve the technological gap, etc. But then, is it actually possible to, for example, measure the collaboration in a low-tech way? For example, even in the classroom.
I think the short answer is yes. The longer answer includes the word badly. So yes, we can do it, but we can't do it very well in a direct way. We probably have to be reliant upon self-reporting what people are doing using a fairly sophisticated system of rubrics to allow people to monitor what they're doing and to record what they're doing themselves. We've had a little bit of a try at doing that as part of our project, and it's very difficult to do that, but I guess in a non-technology era or area, that's self-report using rubrics is going to be a major way of doing it. Certainly standardized tests, multiple choice tests would be impossible. Oh, having said that, that's what PISA did, of course. They developed a scenario and the student chose a particular action within that scenario, and then they used a multiple choice format to identify what the student would do and where to go with the next phase of the problem. Very difficult without technology.
Okay, very difficult without technology. Actually, at the IIEP, within our training program, we have integrated something called a peer review. That means whenever we have some group activities, we ask the other members of the team to evaluate the others. And that is another example of using low technology in order to measure the kinds of participation, collaboration, etc. And then another question is that with those skills, of course, yes, they are very important now and in the future, but then of course, we still have to measure, continue measuring the cognitive traditional learning domains such as reading, writing, numeracy, because collaboration or metacognition and creativity, etc. If we do not know how to read, if we do not know how to do the calculation, that is probably not possible. What is your view on that?
Yeah, I don't think those skills will ever be replaced, but they have to be supplemented with the new skills. So the 3 R's will always remain important. But now it's the 3 R's plus the 4 C's, where the focus is. And if we restrict to just the 3 R's, we actually cut out the opportunities for students post-school. Your notion of peer-to-peer evaluation or peer assessment, I think, is a very, very good one. I have a doctoral student at the moment who is doing this in MOOCs and identifying how to assess people in a MOOC using some of the peer-to-peer assessments and the data analytics and building a developmental progression of learning for the tens of thousands of students in a MOOC. So when she publishes that in the near future, I think that will change MOOCs, because suddenly we'll have the capacity to monitor how much somebody has learned, how well they've learned, how well they can think, and how well they they apply what they learn in a MOOC. At the moment, it's pretty much a one-way traffic. But my students' work has taken what we did with the 21st Century Skills Project, begun to apply it to the data files generated in a MOOC, and we're starting to see that there is a developmental progression of learning even in a MOOC. And some of that is peer-to-peer, of course.
Cute. Okay, now, yeah, thank you very much. Our MOOC is actually at the very beginning stage, and we're still trying to figure out different and various ways of evaluating the kinds of different skills. And we have a lot to learn from you, Patrick. Now, are there any more questions? Yeah, all right. So Pat, do you have any final pitch or something, you know, like a conclusion that you want to address to our participants?
Well, I'd say watch this space, because we have a MOOC on the assessment and teaching of 21st century skills, and we're going to repeat that MOOC this year, and hopefully we'll be able to apply the student assessment on the MOOC as well, and build that for people. It runs for about 6 weeks. People all over the world have joined it in the past. We've run it twice. This year we'll do it for the 3rd time, and we don't know exactly when, because we're making a few changes and building some more sessions, but it will come later this year. So it's with Coursera, so watch this space, I guess. And we'd love to work with some of your people in our MOOC.
All right, so we will be doing some what's called hooking between the MOOCs. All right. So thank you again, Patrick Griffin, Professor Griffin, for joining us today to share with us your thoughts and then the project progress and the achievement so far. Now, we are going to have another Hangout tomorrow, Friday, which is going to be with the people from OECD. Now, we heard a little bit about the PISA, which was using these 21st century skills. So we will probably hear more on that. But in addition to that, OECD is doing the PISA for development. That's adapted for the more developing and emerging countries. And so you are encouraged, dear participants, to post more questions on the platform, at the designated area of the platform. All right, so we're going to say goodbye to everybody, and thank you very much again to Professor Patrick Griffin. Bye.
Thank you, Miyako. We'll see you again soon.
See you.